Well, hello and welcome to our course on relationship building for adults with ADHD. I'm Bruce Brown and I have ADHD. I was diagnosed 6 weeks before my 70th birthday and now I'm 75. So I've known that I've had ADHD for 5 years and about a quarter. Actually, I guess I've known all my life that something was different, but I wasn't sure what it was. And in fact, I internalized some negative opinions about why I, in some cases, behaved the way that I did. But give you a quick overview of myself, a little bit about my ADHD story, how I compensated with both personal and business relationships, and then just tell you about my motivation, which is, I'll give you a hint on that one, it's all about trying to help myself and others turn around broken or weak relationships so that we can all learn how to build and maintain strong, healthy relationships with other people. Okay, so I went to college. I actually was a good student through middle school, until middle school. And then when we started having to do homework, I started having some issues. And I got labeled an underachiever. My dad actually was a guidance counselor at the high school where I was going to go. So my parents were both educators, and they didn't understand. I had been top of my class practically for most of my elementary school years, but then I started losing it when I was in junior high school, and that pattern continued into high school and through college. I did go to graduate school. I have a couple graduate degrees. I really enjoyed graduate school, and maybe that's why I found more success there, because I was picking the courses I really wanted to take, and actually the majors that I really wanted to pursue. But anyway, when I graduated from college, my first degree was in English with a minor in psychology, and well, my original plan was not to be a teacher, but I was originally going to be a lawyer, but that's part of my ADHD story, so I'll leave that. But anyway, I taught, I was fortunate to get a job teaching high school English in a small exurban town in Connecticut, and I taught there for 13 years. I enjoyed it. There are many parts that I really enjoyed, but I almost had more interest. I usually had multiple jobs, and in the course of a few years, I got a master's degree in psychology, and then I got an advanced graduate degree, not a PhD, but an advanced degree in counseling and therapy. I was actually therapeutic counseling, and I was in therapy as part of that, and just because I wanted to and needed to. And I taught in the graduate level, taught courses. I was part of a 3/4 time faculty in the graduate counseling department at St. Joseph University in Connecticut. I also taught computer stuff, eventually taught computer stuff at Wesleyan University, business uses of computers, not programming or coding or software development. And I taught some education courses related to computers at the University of Hartford. So I was wearing a lot of hats and really kind of enjoying that, but I wasn't really getting as far. I wasn't getting the satisfaction I really needed. And I ended up leaving teaching and stopping, halting my participation in a counseling company, a group that I had helped co-found. And I got turned down by personal computers in the early 80s, and I was really turned on by the empowerment I saw with personal computers. And so I really dove right into that. And that's a long story, but basically quickly formed in a couple of years with a couple of other people, a computer consulting company. We did pretty well. We was also writing for computer magazines, national computer magazines, and really liked that. And eventually starting in 1988, that was my deal. I just let everything else sort of go away and just focused on being a freelance writer, which I enjoyed. But meantime, I always talked with other people about all kinds of things in their lives and their businesses and how they use computers. And I was always drawn to doing that. That motivation to help other people never left. I never abandoned that, but even though my focus was on writing reviews or technology stories about various technologies related to personal computing. Skipping ahead a bunch of years, by the end of actually the beginning of the 2000s, we began to detect or suspect, because it was pretty obvious, that computer magazines were going to be going away because computers had become commoditized, which meant there weren't as many brands, which meant there wasn't as much advertising, which meant there wasn't as much room for editorial content, like the kind that myself and that I created, along with a lot of other people, including my wife, who was working with me at that time. My wife, by the way, Marge does not have ADHD, but she has lived with a person with ADHD all of her life. Well, no, I'm sorry, not all of her life, all of our married life, which is now going on 52 years, which I think is pretty cool. But she did not know that before. She found out the same time I did. I stopped writing technology stuff from 2004 until about 2015. It took 11 years off, trying some other things, some of which worked well, some of them did not work all that well. It was time to get back. And I went back to technology writing, and that is really my main job now, and I love it. I'm a freelancer for a couple of websites, and I'm as busy as I could be with that. And so for me, that's great. As a person with ADHD, it's wonderful because I get to write about different topics all the time. And I only write short stuff, so I don't have to worry about longer works or require thinking about things for more than a couple of days, in specific projects. Then I began to notice that I was having more and more difficulty. This was in 2016, or about right around that time, 17. I began to notice that I was interrupting myself when I was writing articles, and I found that sometimes I'd get to the last paragraph, that I needed to just finish a paragraph to be able to then do a quick proofread and then send it off to the editors because I had to hit a deadline. And I found that I was wandering around the house. I'd find myself in the kitchen. It wasn't that I didn't know where I was, but I would be distracted by something, and I would walk away from the task that I really wanted to finish. And I was yelling at myself, saying, go back, sit down, finish that article, and then go take a walk or go take a nap or whatever. And it was getting more and more, it was getting worse. I was doing that. I found that happening more and more often, and I was confused by it. I did not know what was going on. Then I was doing research one day for an article, some background research, and I found an article in the New York Times about Adderall addiction. That young people, coders, I guess, people who worked in various roles required a lot of concentration in the technology industry, and it talked about how some of them sort of there seemed to be a high incidence of people who were overusing or misusing Adderall in order to just work. People who were not people with ADHD, who didn't have a medical need for it. And in the course of the article, the author kept comparing how Adderall worked with people who had ADHD and how it had the effect it could have on people who did not have ADHD but took it. And every time in that article, when it referred to the people with ADHD and how they reacted to things, it's like, wow, that sounds like me. Like it was a huge insight for me, and really, I guess you could say I self-diagnosed first, right? I went to my doctor, called my doctor that day, and made an appointment to go speak with my primary care physician. And I explained what was going on, and I'd been seeing this guy for 13 years as my doctor, so he knew me pretty well. And he said, well, it really sounds like you have ADHD, but I don't know if you really do. I've never worked with anybody who was your age. And first, you're talking about ADHD. The oldest I'd ever talked with, this is the doctor speaking, he said he was 40 years old, and around that, he said, so I'm going to refer you to a psychiatrist in town who works with adults with ADHD, with older people, and he'll have a better shot at giving you an accurate diagnosis so you can see what's going on. Booked the appointment. I was fortunate to get an appointment pretty quickly, within a couple of weeks. Went and it was not long before, not immediately, but he said, yeah, okay, you got it, no question. And he prescribed medication for me, and that helped a lot. That was 6 weeks before I turned 70, so it was in 2017. I'm sorry, 2016, in November. And since then, I've been taking the medication, and the medication definitely helps me. But maybe the more important thing for me was the clarity. I was struck with like a thunderbolt, understanding more about why I behaved the way that I did, and why I messed up a lot of relationships, personally, some business, because I was behaving as a person with ADHD sometimes can behave. We can get into all those details in other videos or in other talks, but I was messing things up. I was saying things that were inappropriate that I thought maybe were really funny or needed to be said, that often it wasn't an appropriate time, place, or even thing to say to anybody. So that was always a problem. I never quite understood why I had to be that way, because it seemed like I sort of couldn't stop it. But the diagnosis I received definitely helped me understand. I started reading a lot about it. My wife started reading a lot about it because, well, Marge and I were like, okay, this is a new thing in our lives. We're going to be coping with this. It doesn't go away. You can't heal it. It doesn't, you don't cure ADHD. And so we started trying to figure out, ways that we could both maybe help to compensate, or at least allow for the ADHD type behaviors that I had, that I still have, even though I take the medication, and the medication definitely helps me. So over the years, before my diagnosis, my ADHD diagnosis, I did learn several ways to compensate for ADHD with relationships, personal relationships, and business relationships. And really, the most important thing that I sort of found out was that I was best at one-to-one. When I was talking with people one-to-one, and this is really when I was teaching. I was on stage. When I was teaching on stage, and I really enjoyed that, but they weren't really relationships. But when I worked with individual students, or later as a therapist, when I worked with individual, well, we call them clients, not patients. But I could really focus, I could hyper-focus almost, on that person, one at a time, and that really helped. And just as a quick insight to that, as a therapist, I had opportunities to work one-to-one, also with another therapist and maybe two people, or with families or groups. And I was not effective at all working with groups. It's a little bit strange, since my master's degree in psychology was focusing on group dynamics, but that was more from an academic point of view, really. It wasn't anything clinical. But on a one-to-one, I could really focus in and really, I empathize. I thought that was what the deal was, and it was much more successful. And that really extended to my personal life. I don't have a lot of friends, but I have a few very close friends with whom who could tell me anything, and I would confide in them, almost like no barriers, maybe inappropriately almost, I suppose, with revealing details about whatever. But I tended to go that way, and so that was my main compensation tool, was to relate to individuals, for both on a personal basis and in business. I had, in some cases, I had multiple partners in businesses, but I usually would spend more of my time talking with them one-to-one, rather than a lot of drawn-out group discussions. So, you might seem to be a disconnect here, that I had issues with relationships, and yet I've been married for 52 years, and that's a fun story. I enjoy it. There's a lot to it. I would not have even met my wife if I didn't have, or the person who became my wife, if I had not had ADHD, and I would I'm sure I would not have proposed to her 13 days after our first date, which was a blind date, by the way. But I did. And I was holding off because I was afraid I was going to screw the relationship up. I was going to make a mistake because I didn't want to come on too strong and too soon. In fact, Marge wondered why I didn't ask her out again or say I was going to call her when I dropped her off after our first date, because my thinking was I don't want to come on too strong to this woman. I don't. She's this girl. She's so amazing, and she thought I was just like, okay, well, he didn't have much of a good time, I guess. But I did see her again a few times, and then I proposed 13 days after we met, after our first date, and we were married 4 months later, and it'll be 52 years on August 29, what year is this? 2022. So that was kind of cool. And Marge has had to deal with my ADHD and all that time, not knowing what it was, not knowing that I had it, and thinking that, okay, well, I wonder what's going on with this guy. But we tried to work through a lot of things together. That helped a lot. So that's how this relationship was able to happen. And so thank you, ADHD. But no thank you for some of the stupid things I've done along the way. And harmful, hurtful things, or saying things inappropriately in all kinds of situations and stuff. But so that's just a little bit about me and relationships with my personal life and business life. I'm happy to say that I'm very happy. I generally have been really happy. I'm lucky that I have not been a depressed person ever. And I don't think I've ever really felt the depths of depression that some people are too familiar with. And I'm not a particularly anxious person, although I kind of worry things a little bit. But I'm a happy guy, and I have a lot more to say and a lot of insights, I believe, into personal relationships and business relationships, and how people with ADHD can approach those to start new ones, and to build and maintain good relationships, and to, in some cases, heal, relationships that have been broken. There's no magic, but I think we have some information and some insights that can help you. And I am highly motivated. I always have been. The reason I got into computers was because I was motivated to help people understand about the empowerment of personal computers. And that's been my primary driver, work driver certainly, in my life. Is I'm motivated to help others do better, to have better lives. And the focus here is on building better relationships with your ADHD. Thank you very much. And I look forward to jumping into this with a lot more depth with you.